Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for this panel session, which is going to be about the energy transition and the definition of energy security. And we're going to tackle current gas demand, how we reduce that, optimize energy infrastructure and resiliency. So lots of buzzwords there to get stuck into. So joining me today on the panel, I'm delighted to introduce, first of all, Dominique, who is President and CEO of Teréga, the French gas transmission operator. Dominique is an expert in national defence, aerospace and energy, and Teréga is France's second largest gas infrastructure company. And beside him is Sterian, who is the CEO of Transgaz, the Romanian gas transmission operator. Ion is in charge of a current investment plan running to 2028, which is looking to invest 4 billion euros, so a really huge investment plan there. And beside him, we have David Vannier, who is Chief Government Affairs Officer at nuclear technology company Newcleo. And finally, we have Jean-Baptiste Léger, who is the head of transition for the French Business Confederation, MEDEF. So perhaps just to start off with, we can go along the line and you can tell everybody a little bit more about yourself and your company and what you do and directly how you relate to the energy transition.
Yes, so you want me to start. So
yes, please, Dominique.
So just to come back to who we are. So Teréga, it's a transmission and gas storage operator. Of course, the first message I wanted to pass to you through our activity and what we do is that we have not waited political decision to start energy transition. So the plan, for example, that we initiated in 2016 had a main aim. First was to decarbonize our own activity, so trying to be as best as we can in terms of CO2 emissions, in terms of methane emissions. We work to be good, to be sustainable, and to allow gas to be considered in the energy transition as something that you can still use. At the same time, we facilitated, with the help of the government, the injection of biogases in the network. So because natural gas is fine, a mixture of biogas and natural gas it's something that is progressing. The framework is in place. Now, biomethane plant can be connected. It's working well, even if today there is only 2% of our gas which is biomethane. It's improving and it works this direction. And then we started implementing, let's say, programs in order to make our customers, the one we have today, thinking to what could be the future energy after gas or with gas at the same time, trying to imagine what are the key infrastructure that will spread around the countryside in order to allow them to change when the energy will be there. So this is all what we do around the new networks, being able to transit new molecules. And among the molecules, you have, of course, the hydrogen, but also the mastering of CO2. And finally, what we did is it was just to try to explain to everybody that in the future, energy efficiency, sobriety will be key, and is so key that it demands plenty of data in order to be at the proper level. So we also invested into data management and digital. To do so, as the framework is extremely complicated for us, when we are a regulated company, in order to, let's say, progress on all these skills, it was difficult to explain that we do it from a gas perspective only. So we developed a dedicated company, which is called Teréga Solutions, offering the new solutions to the market and showing what the new market could be in the future. So one of our main roles that started in 2016 is really to make impact. And our first plan was called Impact 2025. Make our company change in terms of behavior, in terms of gas emission control, etc., but also make our consumers think to the future. Now we are preparing the next one. We call it Gaia 2035, because now it's not only a matter of preparing, it's the matter of deploying.
Thank you. Hopefully we can delve into some of those topics a bit more as the panel goes on. Ion, would you like to go next? Just tell us a bit about your company and what you're focusing on in terms of the transition.
Păi dacă mi-a venit mie rândul, If it's my turn, then yes, I will present myself. And I can speak in French and English, but not a very good level. And because this panel is very technical, I prefer to speak in Romanian. Transgaz. It's the national transmission company, the national operator of gas that operates in Romania, and the pipeline is around 14,000 kilometers. We are among the first companies in Europe and the biggest in Central Europe and in the Balkans. Starting September 2023, we have stumbled and we are dealing with the transportation of gas in Republic of Moldova. And the company that I lead operates two transportation transmission system in two different countries. Even if we speak the same language, Romanian language, the legislation is different because Romania is member of the EU, but the Republic of Moldova is a candidate country. And of course we have to deal with all this, and we have to pay attention to the decarbonation strategy. By the end of the year we will public our strategy. We have been working for the last year to this strategy. It is financed by the Bank of Transition and another Italian company. I will not make public its name. And we have done our homework when we consider all we have to do concerning decarbonization, and we teamed up with a company from the Arab Emirates in order to detect methane emission. All that is concerning pipelines, and we monitor all this data and we want to implement it. And I tell you, gas will continue to be important for a long period until 2045, 2050. And the big traders in Europe, and not only them, but all over the world, have said when the national company of oil and gas in Qatar started to sell LNG for this period, things got a bit harder, because the European directive concerning hydrogen is not finished. There are still debating on this subject. On the other hand, the technology for transmission of hydrogen, well, I believe those present in this room and many specialists know what hydrogen is. All the security norms concerning transmission, transportation, fire hazards. Of course, it is more risky to transport hydrogen if you do not have all the measures in place. And when it comes to building new pipelines for hydrogen, well, the costs are very big if you compare to pipelines transporting gas. So the global effort that goes into all these adaptations and to adapt all these pipelines to transporting not only gas but also hydrogen are very important. In Romania, we are able to transport 20% of hydrogen through our pipelines. We have high-end power stations, but we have to wait for research and development on this topic. And of course, there are many conferences on this topic all over the world. There are many projects on paper, but in practice, I haven't seen a lot. And I am a specialist in this area. On the other hand,
I would agree with you, but I promise you we will get to this. But let's continue with the introductions before we delve too much into it. David, can I pass to you to tell us about Newcleo? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So we're a company that started 2.5 years ago, with initially 4 employees. We're currently 530. And this pace is highlighting the renewed interest in the nuclear sector. We're developing what's called lead-cooled fast-spectrum reactors. So these are SMRs, small modular reactors, but advanced, as these are generation 4. These are reactors that are highly efficient at producing energy. And the fuel proposition that we're using is something called MOX, which is mixed oxides, which is basically a fuel that is composed of radioactive waste, which we're recycling. And this obviously offers advantages in terms of energy security, in terms of decarbonization, as well as, of course, solving perhaps one of the weaker points of the energy sector, which has always been the production of waste. We're a British company. We're incredibly active in developing our technology in France and in Italy. And so to reassure perhaps my predecessors who spoke, we strongly believe that the future of energy mix of a country has to be exactly that, an energy mix. So we're not advocating solely for nuclear. We believe there should be a plurality of sources, and within the field of nuclear, there should also be a plurality of technologies. I think clearly we see the risk, as no country is immune to the unknown unknowns, right? Whether it's COVID, whether it's Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, or the rest. I think we've all learned recently that we need that spectrum of options and opportunities. And I think in conclusion, where that becomes very important is, we're ultimately producing energy is, there's a social element to it, right? This is a driver of growth. Growth allows people to rise out from poverty. And we're not talking in esoteric terms. I think we're talking about people, and people are our parents, our kids. And so I think this is where energy is really fundamental in building a better world.
Thank you. And Jean-Baptiste.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. So I'm very happy to be here to speak about MEDEF, the French Business Confederation, and how we build together as the energy transition. So MEDEF, we work on 2 legs. We are, of course, a confederation of federations coming from industry to banking, finance, and services, so almost 100 federations from French companies. And we also work with territories. We have more than 120 territorial organizations in France and overseas as well. And this is very important to put in motion energy transition. So what is our position on energy transition? It's very clear. We advocate for resilient, controllable, low carbon and affordable energy to fuel the transition for our companies. So when we say that, and when we think also about diversity, there is one word which is important, which is resilient. Resilience is a concept that comes from ecology, and it talks about collective stability, collective ability to cope with dangers and adaptation. So I think this is a very important word for energy transition, because it means that we need to work collectively for sustainable and decarbonized growth, and we need to really work with neutral technology and not only have one way, but work together at national, sectorial and a European level to achieve these goals.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to gas demand, and for the fourth straight year in its World Energy Outlook, the IEA lowered projections for gas consumption. So demand is expected to peak in all the scenarios they forecast by 2030. We've already heard some views that gas will be important for a really long time, but I'd like to perhaps start with you, Dominique. I mean, do you agree with that? Do you think that gas will peak, consumption will peak in the 2030s, and what happens beyond that? Or if we do have gas until 2040 and beyond, in what form? How do we make that sustainable?
Yeah, in fact, it very much depends from, let's say, the kind and the health of the economy that we will have in 2030. I just take an example, because at the worldwide dimension, it's clear that probably gas will peak, according to the fact that gas will replace part of coal if we want to decarbonize. So it's clear that normally there will be a trend of having more gas. The advantage of gas is that gas is available. So if you look at the main challenges we face in the energy transition, it's clear that one of the questions is the scale that to which, let's say, the roundtable just before us turned to. We don't have the right scale in order to have the right prices for most of the new energies. So gas is probably by 2030 something that will be a big part of the demand and the consumption. Now, when you look at, for example, France, in the scenarios in France, there is another picture because the energy transition has started and there is a strong willingness to support nuclear, to support sobriety, trying to consume less energy than we consume today. And so in the scenarios, you see that by 2030, instead of having 450 terawatt-hour in terms of consumption at the French level, people can think it's between 300 and 250. So it could be a big decrease, a sharp decrease, according to the energy transition speed, to the way, let's say, people will move or companies will move from gas to, for example, wood or, let's say, biogenic things that we can use and that are available on our territories. So we are working today with scenarios. So to answer your question, yes, I think gas demand will be high in 2030. It will depend from regions to regions according to the mix of energy that is available. So it's another way to say that diversity is important, because maybe the fact that we decrease our demand will allow the price to still stay at a level which is affordable for those who want to decarbonize with gas.
Thank you. And Eon, what will a gas transmission company look like in 2040? Will you be operating two networks, one for methane, one for hydrogen? Will it be mixed in together, blended? What do you think? It's a hard question.
Haideți să o luăm, să continui cu ce a început colegul.
Yes, following what my colleague just said, I appreciate his remarks and I congratulate him for the good ideas that he told us. Regarding the global gas reserves, it was proven that they can ensure consumption for another 100 years. Now, why gas? And I'm not here with a gas promoter hat on. I'm only here to support the reality of the situation and a dire need. So, what's the situation for gas? Well, it pollutes less than coal. And think about households. Every time that you hear an argument against gas, you can say that one household in Central Europe or in Ireland or in Poland pollutes less than where people still use coal. Think about one family using coal or wood for 1 year. to heat their household. They emit 4 tons of CO2. If that same family uses gas for heating, you reduce the emissions by at least 50%, so they only emit under 2 tons. So that's already a very good transition from one situation to another. Regarding power supply, electricity, produced through methane gas, because we have new technologies nowadays with combined cycles, with hydrogen as well. In Romania we have 3 plants that are being built with such a combined usage of resources. And Romania supports that process. Together with France and other countries, Romania is also supporting nuclear power rollout, because that's a clean energy. It's true. But on the other hand, hydraulic power is also paramount. So these are the 3 main sources: gas, nuclear and hydro. This is a mix that will allow for a balanced grid in the future. Very recently, last week actually, the European Commission discussed a €900 million fund to strengthen the electricity transportation system. Why? Well, because you need that in the distribution and transport system, and you need electricity coming from renewable energies, solar, wind power, but that's intermittent. It's not linear production. So this also leads to the issue of storage. What about batteries once they run out of power? How do you recycle them when they can't be used anymore? So energy storage and electricity storage in particular is of the essence. I believe that by 2030 we will have made a lot of progress with regards to combined cycles between gas and hydrogen. I'm sure we will still make plenty of progress, but the pathway is still very long before we reach that horizon. There's still a lot of work to do before we completely stop using gas for electricity production.
Jean-Baptiste, are businesses ready to give up gas yet? I mean, I'm sure you hear a lot of talk about PPAs and wanting renewable electricity. Does that mean that, gas use will perhaps be limited more to industry? I mean, what do you hear from the businesses that you represent and work with?
So let me say it loud and clear. At MEDEF, we support the Paris Agreement, we support the target of carbon neutrality by 2050, and we are in the process in France to define our new energy programmation, which will lead ultimately to the end of fossil fuel consumption in France. Does that mean the end of gas? No, for several reasons. The first one is that we're not only talking about natural gas or LNG, we need to increase the part of low carbon gas, such as renewable gases, hydrogen. So gas will remain an important asset in the energy system in France, and also, of course, for French companies for some usages. But clearly, the demand of natural gas and energy will decline and be extincted at some point. So that's why we also work with our companies, with our federation, to achieve this transition with them, to make sure that their business model is secured for the years to come, and that they can invest into the decarbonization agenda while still being profitable and having the condition of a sustainable growth for them.
Thank you. And David, when do you think we will see an SMR in Europe? There's a big competition at the moment, sort of 80 companies competing to get a reactor design that can become the industry standard. I know that your company received some money from the French government earlier this year. How is that project going? And what are your sort of expectations on the timeline for when SMRs can provide some of that diversity of supply and security that you spoke about?
So our plan right now is we'll be building by 2030 a research reactor in France. I think for the technology we're developing, and that I think is what's interesting about the SMR space. First of all, SMRs have been around since the 1950s. So this is a proven technology, right? I mean, it's the U.S. Navy and other navies around the world have been using SMRs for a long time. And then individually, the various components of our technology, whether it's lead, which has been around since the 1950s, fast spectrum reactors since the 70s, MOX, conceptualized in the 60s, commercialized in the 80s. All these are elements that have a couple generation track record. So we're incredibly confident, and not just us as a company, but I think all developers of in the SMR/AMR field, and Rolls-Royce certainly in the UK is doing is advancing swiftly. So our reactor will be up and running by 2030. We'll have a demonstrator up and running by 2026, and so this is proceeding at pace. And partly some of the risks, if you would, of course, in the nuclear field has always been the overrun, both in terms of cost and timing. Just to give you an idea, so we're building a 200 megawatt, which to build, it's about €4 per kilowatt. So you're looking at around 800 million for the first, or a bit less than 600 million for the nth. So these are very reasonable costs when it comes to nuclear. So we'll be, and I think certainly as you alluded to, France has really led the way in terms of establishing a road to market for SMR developers through the France 2030 system, which is part of President Macron's Plan de Relance. And so certainly France is kind of really the trailblazers in the SMR field. If I can add just one thing, I think on the conversation, what we're talking about really is the baseload, right? It's the necessity to ensure that in the future we can provide a baseload, and that's incredibly relevant because the baseload, going back to what I was saying earlier, is really what is going to enable innovation and what can enable economic growth, and so that plurality of sources is obviously going to allow, from the government's point of view, a kind of de-risking on developing innovation and driving, supporting innovation for new market participants. And I think this is incredibly relevant because energy demand is growing at pace. And today, even if in our space of nuclear, we were building 5 times as much reactors as exist today, we probably can meet half of the demands of tomorrow. Energy
security, of course, means not just the supply, but also the supply chain and components and everything. I'd like to ask, I think it's probably relevant for each of you, but Europe's response to the US tax credit system, and can you get what you need for your huge infrastructure projects? Can you get it in Europe? Can you get what you need at a price? I presume not. What do you think of the European response, and also if there are going to be future requirements for local components, which look to be what is being discussed in the European Union at the moment?
I think what is interesting when you speak about gases infrastructure, that in fact the infrastructure, they will be built in your country. So of course, so they will be there and they will stay there. Then you may think that some of the components are key and that they should be bought outside. Frankly speaking, today there is competition, there is innovation everywhere on the electrolysis for example, for hydrogen. There is also some components to be developed for the carbon capture through CCS, etc. But most of that is managed and manageable, and in terms of security of supply, we don't have any question. I think it will be the market, open on to the market, but we can manage it. Now, of course, if you look at energy security, and when you look at the gas itself, I think the crisis that we have just experienced with the war between Russia and Ukraine has made a change a little bit. When I say a little bit, we changed a lot the way we supply gas, or our shippers, the main shippers delivering the gas, are now organized. So they have tried to diversify as much as possible their gas supply. So it's why, in fact, okay, we were dependent on a big source. This was not the only one. So now the market is a little bit more open. So the energy transition, it's clear that it goes also with let's say, implantation of those technology that will serve the energy transition locally. And it's a key element because the CO2, for example, price will play a key role. And I think it's probably where there is a sort of way not to mitigate the IRA, because IRA is a very soft and clever tool. But in any case, if we manage the way the CO2 is paid or is given to companies managing properly their CO2, we can in Europe also have a sort of system that allows us to manage properly this big issue of decarbonization.
David, what about in the nuclear sector, with SMRs in particular? Is there a big chance for Europe to establish itself as a manufacturer? For example, for your demonstration project, where will you be getting most of those components from?
So this is a bit of a schizophrenic moment for me. I'm an American working for a British company that's developing its technology in France. But I think first of all, I think that the plan de relance by President Macron has been really phenomenal in terms of providing avenues of growth for the energy sector and the nuclear one in particular. I think what's incredibly relevant in Europe and the opportunity that Europe has really is the excellence in the global supply chain in nuclear. Just to give you an idea, Confindustria, the Italian MEDEF equivalent, points to 586 companies in Italy that are involved in the global nuclear supply chain. That's compared to around 400 in Japan. So there's a level of excellence in Europe that I think is not always perceived, but is absolutely palatable. We, as a company, we are acquiring a few smaller groups in order to ensure that supply chain remains not just for our purposes, but also to support growth of other developers through nuclear, especially, of course, but not just in Europe. So we're very confident that Europe is the right place to be, and that there are opportunities to build what we need in Europe.
And Jean-Baptiste, our business is worried about the costs increasing. If they are perhaps required to purchase more from Europe and it's more expensive than buying from China, the cost of a project goes up. Is that a big concern that you're hearing from people?
Yeah, clearly, because I mentioned as an introduction, the energy must be competitive. If you're not competitive, you will lose market shares against competition. So there is a thin line here between the need of cooperation, collaboration, and I think it's the right word to use here, and also the need to be less naive. And I think Europe is now waking up. At MEDEF and in France, we have been advocating for several years now for sovereignty, strategic autonomy, and we see that these notions, these concepts that were often perceived as being contradictory with free trade, with open markets, are now getting traction. We have, and Dominique mentioned it, a Net Zero Industry Act in Europe. We are putting in place a carbon border adjustment mechanism. So, of course, there is a thin line between protectionism and equal trade, but this is the direction we need to go in order to make sure that our company can decarbonize, go into the transition while still being competitive and also benefiting from a healthy competition from other parts of the world.
And I'd like to go back to hydrogen, because if we sort of accept that the 2050 targets are legally binding, whatever role gas will have, by the decade before that, we have to start to, remove the carbon from it, either by carbon capture and storage or green hydrogen. So I wonder, perhaps, Ion, you can tell us a bit about how quickly you think hydrogen can take off. You said there are 3 projects in Romania that are already underway to is it to produce hydrogen or to use it?
Deci, haideți să o luăm așa pe rând.
So,
deci, în ceea ce privește gazele...
When it comes to gas, of course, we have a market for gas.
Noi rute de transport.
And we have new transportation routes, new terminals, LNG.
Pe sol, cât și plutitoare.
On soil and floating, and We have some in Balkans, and we have in Greece, in Poland, and there will be a second floating terminal at Gdansk in Poland. And there are some potential countries interested in this technology, and this is I'm talking about Serbia, Slovakia, but because they do not receive gas from other sources. We have European directives and certain codes that are transposed in national legislations, the member states of the EU. But when it comes to hydrogen, we are all at the beginning of this process. The directive is now at its beginning stage, and then the directive has to be transposed in national legislations at the national level. And then we have to think about transportation of hydrogen. And so this process will take some time, at least 2-3 years, until we have a market. Yes, we produce hydrogen in Romania, and there are European funds allotted to this through the National Resilience Program, and there are important sums of money, and of course we're talking here about selling green certificates, and Romania of course respects and implements all that was agreed with the European Commission, but the market is not there yet. The prices are not competitive, and of course we want hydrogen to be a renewable energy, but this will take some time because the technology is not there yet. We need to think about technology progress and also all the legislation on this topic.
And perhaps if we can turn to energy security with, well, I suppose post the cut-off of a lot of pipeline Russian gas to Europe, we've now kind of replaced that with LNG, a lot of US LNG, a lot of Russian LNG. Does that, to your mind, Dominique, represent energy security? You know, do you think that Europe or maybe individual countries need to do more to ensure energy security, or is that enough?
I think it's all a question of planification, and including for hydrogen, etc. All of these things, and the security of supply for the future has to be built step by step. If I come to your question regarding LNG, etc., the energy we have today, it's nuclear, of course, for electricity, it's renewable, and it's gas. In order to secure the gas that we need, according to the fact that we don't have the Russian gas anymore in Europe, we need to use, in fact, the gas that comes from Norway and the gas that comes from the LNG terminals everywhere. What is important is also to organize in our countries the way the security of supply is ensured through the full year. So it's organizing and checking. It works well. I would say there is nothing to improve, but the crisis we have faced has make us consider the organization with more emphasis than in the past. When I say organization of how we supply gas, so filling the storage at the proper moment in time, using also some reserves in the LNG terminal, planning the purchase of gas. This is the role of the shippers to do so, with sometimes the help of the government in order to have prices which are, let's say, organized or better or lower because we increase the quantities of gas we purchase, etc. So it's not perfect, but the gas is there today. It's also in the storage tanks everywhere in Europe. the pipelines where they could have improved or modified have been modified in order to reflect the flux that are now coming from the west and from the south more than from the east part of Europe. So it's a question of managing that, and at the same time, let's say, moving to the energy transition to this new kind of gases. So being able to prepare the next step, which should be planned with the production. For me, the main question, I know you should have the usages of hydrogen or combination of hydrogen and gas. It's important, but the day you have hydrogen, green hydrogen, which is produced cheaply, then the market will move. And so production is for me one key question about electrolysis. So we need to have a ramp up of the electrolysis industry in order to be present, because if we don't do it, we will have to purchase electrolyzers coming from China again. So it comes to the round table we had just before us. We need electrical people. We need people being able to assemble these big things. And we will need infrastructure. And it's why we fully support and we project our future infrastructure in the European network that will arrive to serve the industry where the industry is today in order to avoid disindustrialization and also allow reindustrialization where it's possible. And we are keen to see that the European Union has selected 2 projects from the company that we pushed. One is H2Med joining Spain and France, and another one which is Picasso, allowing to capture CO2 and to reuse CO2 also in e-fuels, etc. So this is the next step. It should be prepared now, because if it's not ready now, we'll still maintain a system that is on the longer term difficult to manage, and that would be one brick, but it's better to have more diversity.
And geopolitics, David, perhaps you could speak a little bit about this. Always comes into energy, in oil markets, in gas markets, nuclear. You know, a lot of the countries that are leaders in nuclear technology are not necessarily friendly trade partners. You know, is that something that helps you in negotiations when you're saying, look at our great SMR designs, you know, and we're friendly?
Well, in a way, sadly, yes, it does, right? Because of the implications that are derived from that. But certainly, I think there's been, you know, the energy crisis in Europe started before the war in Ukraine, but certainly it was crystallized at that point. And I think the importance of energy independence and the ability for countries to be self-sufficient from an energy point of view, I think has really been driven home by the invasion of Ukraine, and that, of course, you know, as we look at what the world looks like today, and perhaps what it might look like in the next few years, the geopolitics, the unknown, are having such an impact on the field of energy. And again, you know, I think the importance and the relevance of this is that there's a few topics really that are kind of across all the fields of humanity, if one would, right? It's education, it's energy, it's health. And so certainly if you don't have these, then it's very complicated to see what the path is to building the world of tomorrow. But certainly, you know, the volatility that is brought about, and you know, if you look at what's happening in Taiwan and China and so on and so forth, there are these flashpoints around the world that are indeed, you know, driving home the need for greater self-sufficiency.
And Jean-Baptiste, businesses obviously bore the brunt of very high energy costs during the crisis. Do you think that businesses are now reassured that we have energy security, we have resilience, that this isn't going to happen again where they see costs surge out of control?
For France, I would say no. Energy is still one of the number one priorities of our companies, as they are very worried that the price will remain high. Of course, they are not as high as before, but there is now a new normal where they are still higher than before. And more importantly, they are still higher and way higher than our competitors in the US or in Asia. Right now, we are discussing in Europe and in France this new market design. And it's a very important moment for Europe, because we are building the system for 2050. And shifting a system is hard, and we have seen that earlier. And competitiveness must be really key in our priorities. That's what we advocate at MEDEF. That's what we advocate with our European partners. We were yesterday in Madrid for a joint meeting with the Spanish businesses, and energy was top of the agenda. A few weeks ago, we were in Berlin with Italian and German businesses, and energy was key, and it was just before a deal was made at the European Council. So, yes, it's extremely important. We must be very confident that there is a path that conjugates decarbonation, strategic autonomy, competitiveness, employment and jobs in our territories, and this is what we advocate for at MEDEF for a sustainable growth.
Thank you. And perhaps this will have to be the last question, but Ion, I wanted to ask you what your perceptions are of how the region that you operate in would cope if the transit gas agreement with Ukraine is not renewed at the end of next year. Do you think that that would be a problem?
Chiar dacă nu acordai cuvântul, intervenea meu. Colegul de la Teréga.
Thank you for this question.
Din vestul Europei.
My
Eu vorbesc de coridorul
colleague already mentioned the European pipelines from the west. I'm going to tell you about the Transbalkanic corridor. After the Russians built pipelines on the territory of Bulgaria and Serbia, what did we do? Well, in 2021, we transformed the entire Transbalkanic corridor at minimum costs, especially Corridor 2. So now we are able to supply gas directly from the Caspian Sea, from Azerbaijan. Is also the Republic of Moldova, which is Moldova is strongly supported by Romania, and Ukraine also signed contracts with Azerbaijan. So that pipeline is used, and that would have been unimaginable 3-4 years ago. There's this pipeline coming directly from Azerbaijan to Ukraine, and after Ukraine it goes into Slovakia, and that is very important. We need that pipeline to reach our territories as well, and reach close to Western Europe. There's also Turkey, that has capacity for liquid natural gas with 6 terminals, 60 billion cubic meters. Greece as well has a terminal that works, and another one that will be open in Alexandroupolis in January, and a third one where Transgaz is going to become a shareholder. So diversification of sources does exist now, and that's why the price of gas in the stock market is lower nowadays, and stable, and more stable, by the way, than before the war in Ukraine.
There's another proof of this. The member states of the EU have mobilized in an exemplary fashion with the ability to store up energy. I mean, I think in the EU we are up to 99%. In Romania we even have reached 103%. We are overstocked almost. But well, we're very fortunate in Romania because we're the second gas producer in the EU. So we do have large stocks ever since. And by 2027 we expect to double production because we'll be using the gas reserves in the Black Sea. And domestic consumption is also expected to double because compared to Western European countries where almost 95% of households have got a connection to the gas mains, we only halfway there. So that's going to increase. We expect standards of living to increase as well. We expect also also housing to both develop and improve in quality. But of course, all this brings in the other challenge of CO2 emissions. I mean, that's what I was saying at the beginning of my presentation. You have coal and gas that will generate CO2 emissions, unfortunately. Having said that, we should have a safe winter, and technology is going to improve. In our company, we have an R&D department. We have, in fact, the first pilot plant to inject hydrogen into the gas mains. We know how to do this, and in the there's a war raging next door, so the gas mains from the Baltic states and Central Europe, they will try to convert to hydrogen in the future. Well, in Europe, the main source of pollution may change. I mean, if you look at the Middle East, at the situation out there, of course. Look, I wish. And
I'm sorry to cut you off because obviously geopolitics is fascinating in your region. But thank you so much, and thank you to everybody on the panel, each of you for your insights. Thank you very much indeed.